Hi everyone, this is Unit 2 of Module 4 of the Clean Fleets online training package, looking at lifecycle costing. And this unit will look in particular at the operational lifetime cost methodology provided by the Commission within the Clean Vehicles Directive. And I will refer to it here as the OLC methodology to save a bit of time. So what is it, first of all? This methodology provides a way to monetize the environmental factors which the Clean Vehicles Directive requires you to take into account in your procurement decision making. This means providing an actual cost that you can use in your procurement decisions for energy consumption, for CO2 emissions, and for the emissions of the other harmful substances covered by the directive. An important point to mention here, first of all, is that this is just one of the methodologies that the Commission provides. So you do not need to use this to comply with the Clean Vehicles Directive. However, if you wish to monetize environmental emissions in your procurement decision making, this is the methodology that you have to use. So it's prescriptive in that case. An important point to mention here is that this methodology provides you with an actual cost at the end. So there will be a cost for the fuel consumption. There will be a cost for your CO2 emissions of the vehicle. It is not intended to be used as part of a points scheme within the award phase, but as actual part of the financial calculation within a procurement decision-making process. Okay, so let's get into the actual calculation itself and start straight off with the most complex of these, and this relates to fuel consumption. Now, what we see in this table on the left-hand side are all of the different types of fuels that you may have in your vehicle. It's not quite exclusive, but for the case of simplicity, this is the way we've done it here. The second column provides you with fuel consumption in litres per 100 kilometres, and this is data that you will receive from the vehicle manufacturer. As you can see, it's not always done in litres, but for electric vehicles in kilowatt hours, for CNG vehicles in cubic metres. So the key question here is how we get from the fuel consumption figures that are provided by the manufacturers to the final column, the actual lifetime fuel consumption cost that you will include in your procurement decision making. First step, figures are normally provided in litres per 100 kilometres, but what we need for calculation purposes is fuel consumption in litres per kilometre. So we simply divide the first figure by 100 to achieve that. Second important point is that the Clean Vehicles Directive provides a figure for the energy content of different fuels per litre. And these are specific figures that you need to use in this calculation. So for example, diesel fuel is considered to contain 36 megajoules of energy per litre. Petrol, however, contains 32 megajoules of energy per litre. And as you can see, the figures are rather different, particularly for electric vehicles there. Okay, so now we have litres per kilometre and we have megajoules per litre. To move on to assess fuel consumption in terms of megajoules per kilometre, we need to multiply these two columns. So you multiply fuel consumption in litres per kilometre by the fuel conversion factor of megajoules per litre, and this gives you fuel consumption in megajoules per kilometre, which is what we need for the final calculation. Once we have this figure, then we need to know for calculation purposes what is the cost of a unit of energy in euros. And this figure is again prescribed by the Clean Vehicles Directive, and the figure should be the cost of a litre of either petrol or diesel, whichever is cheapest, and that cost before tax. Now you can find out this figure yourself, or the Commission does provide a website where you can find the most recent and up-to-date information. But what's very important to note is that this is the same for all fuel types. So this is not a pure calculation of the actual financial costs of fuel consumption for you. It is a hypothetical assessment of the energy content of the fuels that you are using. So once you have the cost per unit of energy, you have the cost per kilometre in euros by, obviously, multiplying the amount of energy you're using per kilometre to the cost of that unit of energy. So, in the penultimate column, we have the cost per kilometre in euros. To make the final jump, what we need to know is how many kilometres the vehicle is going to travel. Now, the Commission provides, as an example figure, 200,000 here within the Clean Vehicles Directive. However, that is adjustable if you have more accurate data on what you think your own consumption for that particular vehicle will be. So for purposes of argument here, we've used the figure 200,000 kilometres, and so the final calculation is simply to multiply the cost per kilometre by the amount of kilometres you will travel, and this gives you the overall lifetime fuel consumption cost in euros. And what's interesting here is the different types of fuels and the results that they give you. So as you can see, electricity has a very low cost, whereas CNG, which is a rather inefficient fuel, has a very high cost here. Okay, some more simple calculations for the other environmental aspects. So first of all, CO2 emissions. Again, here on the left we have the different types of fuel that you may have in your vehicle. CO2 emissions in grams per kilometre in the second column. This again is a figure that's given to you by your manufacturer. So all vehicles, at least all cars and light duty vehicles, will have this figure available. This figure is given in grams per kilometre. We need to turn this into kilograms per kilometre. So as you can see, we divide this figure by 1,000 to get kilograms per kilometre. The cost of a kilogram of CO2 is again something that is defined by the Clean Vehicles Directive. There's actually a range of different costs that you can use here. I think it's between 0.03 and 0.08. The directive will provide that, and it's also included within the Clean Fleets website, guidance and tool. Okay, once you have the cost of a kilogram of CO2 and you know what your emissions of CO2 are, you can multiply these together, and this will give you the specific CO2 emissions for the vehicle. You have to multiply this by 200,000 kilometers again. Okay, then we look at the other emissions, and first of those is NOx, and again the principle is very similar. In fact, here it's even easier. Here's the fuel type, here's the figures on the emissions of NOx that's provided by the manufacturer in grams per kilometre, and here is the cost provided within the Clean Vehicles Directive, which is thankfully also in grams. So in this case we simply need to multiply this by this by this, so that's the emissions in grams per kilometre by the cost of 1 gram by the total distance that the vehicle has travelled, and that will give you your lifetime NOx emissions cost. Exactly the same principle for non-methane hydrocarbons. Here you can see there's a very, very low cost in terms of the total per gram in terms of euros. And the final one looks at particulates. Again, same principle. Fuel type, figures provided by your manufacturer, the cost per gram of particulates, total distance travelled, giving the lifetime emissions cost. Okay, so that's all the different components of the methodology. And finally here we need to put it all together. So, vehicle type on the left, and here are the results of each of those 5 calculations that we have made. The monetized costs of fuel consumption, the monetized costs of the CO2, NOx, non-methane hydrocarbons and particulate emissions. Add it all up and you get your total operational lifetime cost. And this is a figure that you can use directly in your procurement decision making to compare the different costs of vehicles. And what of course is very interesting to see here is how the different types of vehicle fare. Now these are hypothetical figures that we've put in here, but they are also fairly representative. And you will see that the electric vehicles have a very low operational lifetime cost figure. CNG vehicles have a fairly high one, and the others are somewhere in between. And this is because the fuel consumption figure provides by far the biggest element of the final cost. So here for diesel you can see 5,800 euros comes from fuel consumption, just 612 from CO2, only 107 from NOx, and down to less than €1 for the particulates. So the vast amount of this comes from the fuel consumption figures, which is where the electric vehicles almost always come out on top. So that provides a very short overview of the OLC methodology. It's a fairly complex methodology, but you'll be pleased to know that within the Clean Fleets Guide there is a more detailed description of this methodology and how it's carried out. And we've also produced an LCC tool which includes the possibility of making this calculation and taking that within. And that is the subject of the next unit.